Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this video is all about the movie capabilities of the Fujifilm X100 VI. Yep, you might assume this camera is more focused on stills photography, but with this latest model, Fujifilm has greatly improved the video capabilities. But if you're more interested in the photography side of things, I've got a separate in-depth review all about them that's linked here, which also talks about the design and the controls, so that's going to let me concentrate just on the movie mode for this video that you're watching now. Before kicking off though, I've got a quick correction for that first video where I said that all accessories from earlier models should work on the X100 VI, including cases. I've since discovered that this only applies to Fujifilm's own accessories, as anything else that screws into the tripod thread, such as third-party cases or L brackets, will no longer work, as the thread has now moved on this new model. So be warned. Okay, now on with the movie capabilities. The X100 VI offers 1080, 4K, 4K HQ and now 6.2K recording modes at a variety of frame rates, but with various crops and quality. It'll film uncropped 1080 or standard 4K from 24 to 30p, but it incurs a mild 1.1 times crop when filming in either 50 or 60p. I believe that the standard 4K mode involves pixel binning. A separate 4K HQ mode is available from 24 to 30p, which incurs a more substantial 1.23 times crop, but it's oversampled from 6.2K's worth of data for potentially better results. The X100 VI also lets you film in that full 6.2K resolution, again from 24 to 30p and with the same 1.23 times crop. All the 1080 and 4K modes, including 4K HQ, are available in 16:9 or wider DCI shapes, although 6.2K is only available in 16:9 and there's no open gate option. If you prefer slow motion, you can film 1080 from 100 to 240p, again with that 1.23 times crop, and with the footage automatically slowed in camera to a choice of frame rates. For example, filming at 240p and encoding at 24 will give you a 10 times slowdown, while filming at 200p and encoding at 25 will slow it by 8 times. Let's have a look at some footage of Brighton Pier that I filmed with the X100 VI for this review, starting with 1080 at 25p, which again is uncropped widthways. Now here's 1080 at 50p, where you'll see the mild 1.1 times crop to the field of view. I was a bit surprised to see it do this at 1080 50p, but there you go. Now let's return to 1080 25p before switching to standard 4K 25p, where you'll see a boost in detail, albeit not as much as you'll see in the HQ mode. Next, for standard 4K at 50p, which like 1080 at 50p incurs that mild 1.1 times crop, before returning to standard 4K at 25p, and now switching to that better quality 4K HQ mode, again at 25p. Obviously the view is now tighter with its 1.23 times crop, now making the lens roughly equivalent to 43mm, but looking beyond that magnification difference, it's clear how the details are now crisper and there's less moire to worry about. 4K HQ is definitely superior to standard 4K in terms of detail and reduced artifacts, but you do have to deal with that substantial crop, frame rates that only go up to 30p, and in my tests, quicker overheating. And finally, for 6.2K at 25p, which when played on a 4K timeline like this is going to look a lot like 4K HQ footage with the same crop and limitations. But thanks to having a higher resolution to start with, you can effectively zoom in by about 1.6 times while maintaining 4K quality. These different crops actually provide the X100 VI with 3 effective focal lengths when filming in 4K. Choose standard, uncropped 4K, and you'll have the standard 35mm equivalent coverage that you do on photos. Choose 4K HQ mode, and the 1.23 times crop will bring you to 43mm equivalent. Or film in 6.2K, and on a 4K timeline you can enlarge that footage by up to 1.6 times, effectively giving you a zoom between 43 and 70mm without losing any quality. So these modes essentially equip the X100 VI kind of with a 35 to 70 zoom when filming in 4K. Just before moving on, a quick comparison between the X100 VI at the top and the earlier X100 V at the bottom, both filming 4K at 25p. I'm playing them normal width, but they're cropped vertically so I can fit them both on the frame here. You can see the older V is actually capturing crisper looking 4K here, but the X100 VI's optional 4K HQ mode will beat them both on detail, plus you're getting benefits of IBIS and longer recording times on the new model. Let's now return to 1080 at 25p on the X100 VI in order to make some slow motion comparisons, starting with 1080 at 100p, which on my 25p timeline represents a 4x slowdown. Here you'll see not only the impact of a 1.23 times crop, but a softening of details. And now for 1080 at 200p for an 8x slowdown on my 25p timeline, again sharing the same crop and reduced quality of the 100p version. Note that there's no sound recorded in slow motion modes. Clearly 4K HQ in the 6.2K frame that it's generated from are the video highlights of the X100 VI, and they are the preferred choice if you can accommodate the crop and the maximum 30p frame rate. To further illustrate the differences, here's a clip that I filmed with the X100 VI in standard 4K, handheld using IBIS alone, where you may notice some softness or moire in the finest building details. And now for a 4K HQ version, again handheld with IBIS, and while the 1.23 times crop may bring you closer to standard coverage, there's no denying how much crisper the image has become. But what about recording times? On the previous X100 V you were limited to 15-minute clips in 1080 or just 10-minute clips in 4K. Worse, it was very susceptible to overheating after only a few minutes of filming. Coincidentally, I filmed the B-roll of my initial X100 VI preview video with the X100 V and found it a very frustrating experience having to pause regularly for the camera to cool down. So I'm delighted to report that the X100 VI no longer has any recording time limits, and while overheating can still occur, it now happens after much longer. Set to standard 4K, I managed to film an hour and 19 minutes on a full charge before the battery ran out, and that was without any overheating. I also managed a similar time when I had the camera set to 1080 25p. Unsurprisingly, the 4K HQ mode is more demanding, but I still managed to record just over half an hour of it before the camera overheated. At this point, roughly half of the battery remained. So the longer recording times make the X100 VI much more practical than the X100 V. Okay, now hold on to your lunch as it's time for some rolling shutter tests, starting with standard 4K in 25p on the X100 VI, where you can see it's actually fairly well behaved in terms of skewing. Let's now switch that for the 4K HQ mode, where oversampling means slower readout, in turn resulting in increased rolling shutter. Now it's not the worst I've seen by any margin, but the standard 4K is definitely less susceptible. And for good measure, now for 6.2K, where you'll see a similar amount of rolling shutter compared to the 4K HQ mode. Not surprising since both are starting with the same crop and pixel count. Moving on, the X100 VI inherits the built-in neutral density filter, or ND filter, as its predecessor. This is deployed manually from a menu or a customized button, and it reduces the incoming light by 4 stops. This should allow you to film video at more motion-friendly shutter speeds in daylight conditions, at least if you can close down the aperture by a few stops. As an example, here's a clip that I filmed without the ND filter, where on the conditions of the day I needed a shutter speed of 400th of a second, and that's resulted in fairly choppy looking footage here. And now for a version filmed with the ND applied, where I could reduce the shutter speed to 50th of a second for more natural looking motion blur. It's a very handy feature to have, although of course you can still screw on separate filters onto the X100 VI if you're using the optional filter mount accessory. Now for video autofocus, starting with a single AF area and the aperture opened fully to f2. As I moved side to side, you'll see some occasional hesitations, but on the whole it's quite good performance without any overshooting or wobbling to worry about. You'll also get an idea of bokeh at close range here. How about presenting to camera? Here I've set the X100 VI to face detection and again open the aperture to f2, where there's mild but still attractive separation from the background. As I change my position, you may notice the camera sometimes takes a brief moment to catch up, but it always gets there and again avoids overshooting or wobbling. Here's another example, but filmed indoors this time, again at f2, where you'll see similar tracking performance. Certainly, if you're standing mostly still or can pause for a moment, I'd say it's easy to use the X100 VI for presenting to camera with trustworthy autofocus, even if you can't see the screen from in front of the camera. If you do need to see yourself when filming, you'll need to connect an external HDMI monitor, or of course check the view using the X app on your phone. The biggest upgrade on the X100 VI over its predecessors is having built-in sensor shift stabilization, or IBIS for short. This completely transforms the camera for handheld video. So here's a clip I filmed in 4K 25p without any stabilization, where the view is of course wobbly, and this is effectively what you'd get with previous models. But now here's the view with IBIS enabled, where you'll see a substantial reduction in wobbles. Now if there are some straight lines near the edges, you may notice a little bit of warping, but if you're reasonably careful you will be able to capture decent looking stable footage. If you need additional help, you can enable digital stabilization, or DIS, working alongside IBIS here to steady the view further, albeit with a mild reduction in the coverage. Note the digital stabilization is not available for 4K HQ or 6.2K as they're already cropped. And finally, for the optional Movie Boost IS mode here, which is designed to further lock an image when you're not panning or walking. Here you can see that it's visibly keeping the view steadier, almost snapping into place when you recompose. But while the stabilization is working well when I'm static, once you start walking with the X100V, I've found that its stabilization proved less effective, such as this clip that I filmed with IBIS alone. Vlogging becomes an even greater challenge, not just for the stabilization, but since the screen doesn't face forward and the lens simply isn't wide enough when held at arm's length. Here I'm holding it as far out as I can and you're still faced with my giant floating head of doom. Shame, as the rendering actually looks really nice in the background here. And if you were to attempt to walk while hand holding it in a vlogging style, you'll see that the IBIS just isn't up to the task, even if you were using the optional wide lens adapter. For smoother results when walking, you'll need better technique than mine, or use a gimbal. And if you're wondering how the built-in microphones sound, well, you're listening to them right now. I'm hand holding this from about 50 centimeters away with IBIS alone. Sorry, the image is a bit too tight. And finally, you can use the X100 VI as a standard USB webcam without any drivers. I tested it on YouTube Live, where it delivered a 1080 60p stream over USB, regardless of what I had the camera set to. I didn't get to try a longer stream, but I can confirm that the camera indicated it was being powered over USB when streaming to my MacBook. Here's how it looked. Hi, this is a quick test with the Fujifilm X100 VI, using it as a USB webcam directly into my MacBook and doing a YouTube live stream. I'm using the microphone in my laptop and I'm using the camera to work as a standard webcam. Okay, now for my verdict for the movie capabilities of the camera, with a few extra clips thrown in for you. For video shooters, the X100 VI represents a substantial upgrade over its predecessors. The new 4K HQ and 6.2K modes may incur a crop, but capture visibly more detail than the previous models, and crucially, you can now record for much longer before overheating becomes an issue. Meanwhile, the presence of IBIS transforms the camera's usability when filming handheld, and while it struggled to effectively stabilise walking footage in my own tests, it did prove effective for more static compositions, a bit like simulating a tripod but handheld. Limitations with the IBIS when walking, coupled with the lack of a flip screen or a wide lens, means that few, if any, would attempt to use the X100 VI for handheld vlogging in front of the camera. But if you're behind the camera and the coverage works for your subject, you can enjoy some pretty good looking results. If you mostly intend to film video though, there are of course better options out there, such as the wealth of interchangeable lens models, including those from Fujifilm itself, while the DJI Pocket 3 remains my own personal favourite for handheld vlogging. But if you're a hybrid shooter who captures both photo and video, you'll find the X100 VI more flexible than any model in the series to date. I've been personally travelling with the previous X100V for over 2 years now, and while I love it for photos, I rarely end up using it for video. But that all changes now with the X100 VI, which for some trips really could do it all. And that's it for this review of the movie capabilities. Once again, if you're interested in the design, the controls and photo side of the X100 VI, then do check out my other in-depth review that I've linked to here. And let me know in the comments if the X100 VI has now become your ideal compact camera, assuming of course that Fujifilm can fulfill early and continued demand for it. Thanks for watching, consider giving me a like and a follow if you find my videos useful, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.